My name is Amara Washington. I am 62 years old. I taught second grade for 11 years, raised 2 children in a red brick house in southwest Atlanta, pressed my husband's shirts for 38 years, and believed, with everything I had, that trust was the foundation of a good marriage. I was right about trust. I was wrong about who deserved mine. The night I finally understood exactly how wrong I had been, I wasn't crying. I wasn't pacing the hallway. I was sitting perfectly still in the small sitting room at the end of the upstairs hall, in the dark, in my reading glasses, holding my phone in both hands. My chamomile tea had gone cold on the side table 45 minutes ago. I hadn't moved to warm it up. On my phone screen, through the live feed of a small camera I had hidden 4 days earlier on the bookshelf in my husband's study, tucked behind his row of leather-bound financial reference books, the ones he kept for appearances more than reading, I was watching Quentin Washington come undone. He came down the hall at 2:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I watched the timestamp. He wore his charcoal silk blend robe, the good one, and his reading glasses were pushed up on his forehead. He moved the way he always moved, deliberate, unhurried, like a man who had never once in his life had a reason to rush. He crossed to the safe behind the credenza, entered the combination, reached inside. His hand stopped. He looked at what was sitting on top. The divorce papers I had placed there 2 nights prior while he slept. Neatly paper-clipped, attorney Nadia Freeman's name printed clearly on the cover sheet. He stared at them, and then, and this is the detail I still turn over in my mind when I cannot sleep, he set them to the side, not gently, the way you move a coffee cup that is in your way, the way you move something that does not matter enough to look at twice. He dropped back to his knees and started pulling things out of the safe. Files, envelopes, a small accordion folder from the back. His movements were no longer deliberate. They were getting faster. I heard him through the camera's small microphone, barely a whisper. No. Where is it? Where is the USB? He went down on both knees. Both hands inside the safe, moving things, pulling from the corners, checking behind stacked folders. And that is when I saw his hands begin to shake. Where is the USB? Where is the USB? I sat in the dark with my cold chamomile, and I watched the man I had cooked 38 Thanksgiving dinners for, the man whose mother I had nursed through her final months, whose career I had quietly propped up while I set down my own. I watched that man fall apart over a piece of plastic no bigger than my thumbnail. Not over the divorce papers, not over losing me. Over a USB drive labeled in his own careful handwriting, Backup 2019. And in that moment, something settled over me like cold water, clear and still. He was not afraid of losing his wife. He was not afraid of the divorce. He was not afraid of his children learning the truth. He was afraid of what was on that drive, more afraid of that than of anything else in that room. I whispered to myself in the dark, he is more scared of the USB than he is of me leaving him. There is something deeply revealing about what a person panics over, not what they say when they are composed, not what they claim to value in their Sunday best voice at church or at a charity dinner with the right people watching. What they reach for in the dark, what makes their hands shake at 2 a.m. when they believe no one is looking. Quentin Washington had built his entire identity on control, not just financial control, though that was the mechanism, identity control. He was the man who held the map. He was the one who knew where everything was, what everything meant, what everything was worth. In a world where a black man with his background and his ambition had to work 3 times as hard to earn a seat at certain tables, that control was not just ego. It was survival strategy. It was the armor he had built so carefully over so many decades that he had eventually stopped being able to tell where the armor ended and the man began. So when control is the architecture of a person's entire self, when being the one who knows is the only version of themselves they trust, losing the information does not just feel like losing an argument. It feels like ceasing to exist. That is why his hands were shaking. Not over me, over a backup drive. Over the possibility that the carefully constructed version of reality he had maintained for 9 years might now be in someone else's hands, might now belong to someone who could read it without his permission, without his framing, without his explanation attached. The divorce papers he could survive. He had probably planned for those too, but information he could not control, that was the thing that broke him. Now, I know you are already asking 2 questions, and you deserve the answers to both. Why did I put the divorce papers inside my husband's safe? And what was on that USB drive from 2019 that made a man who had controlled everything in his world for 65 years drop to his knees and shake? Stay with me. Because to understand that night, you have to understand what came before it. And what came before it will break your heart before it makes you proud. Tell me something before we go on. If you had been in my place that night, watching all of this on a 2-inch screen in the dark, would you have walked downstairs right then and confronted him? Or would you have stayed quiet and kept gathering evidence? Drop your answer in the comments, because what I chose to do next surprised even me. 3 months before that night, I was still the woman everyone thought was lucky. That is the word people used, lucky, as in, Amara, you are so blessed to have a man who handles everything. As in, you don't have to worry about the finances, do you? As in, and this one would sting later when I really let myself hear it. Quentin takes such good care of you. He did say that. Quentin. At dinner parties in Buckhead, at the firm's charity events, at the church fellowship hall after Sunday service, he would stand beside me with his hand on my back and say to whoever was nearby, I handle the finances so Amara can live light. I used to believe that was love. I had been a 2nd grade teacher for 11 years. I loved everything about it. The smell of a classroom in September, the way a child's face changes in the exact moment something clicks. But when Quentin's career started climbing at the firm, when the networking dinners and the client events and the image building started requiring a certain kind of wife in a certain kind of dress, saying the right things at the right times, we made what I thought was a mutual decision. I left teaching. You will have time for yourself, Amara. We will travel. You will not spend your days managing other people's children. He said it so warmly and reasonably that I believed him. I set down 11 years of work I loved, and I picked up his life instead. I drove our children. I kept the house on Cascade Heights Drive. I showed up at events with the right smile on the right arm. And I signed the papers Quentin brought home because he understood these things, and I trusted him. I told myself that was a partnership. It was not a partnership, but I did not know that yet. What I understand now, and what took me a long time to be honest with myself about, is that giving up my career was the first transfer, not of money, of power. Of the particular kind of confidence that comes from earning your own income and standing in a room where your presence has a value that does not depend on anyone else's name. When I stopped teaching, I stopped having a professional identity that was entirely mine. And without that, slowly, gradually, without any single dramatic moment I could point to, I began to defer. On small things first, then on larger ones, and eventually on things I should never have handed over at all. This is how financial control works in a long marriage. It does not arrive announced. It does not come with a warning or a document that says, plainly, you are losing ground here. It comes in the form of a husband who is simply very good at what he does, who says he will handle it so you do not have to worry, and who says this so consistently and with such apparent care that one day you look up and realize you do not actually know what you have, where it is, what it is worth, or whether any of it, legally, practically, really, belongs to you. And the most devastating part? You did not feel it happening, because it was wrapped in the feeling of being taken care of. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday evening in late July. Zara came to the house, our daughter, 34 years old, raising her 9-year-old son Marcus on her own after a divorce that had cost her more than money. She came not for herself. She never asked for herself. but for Marcus. The boy had developed an ear infection that had spread, and the specialist visit and prescription and follow-up together would run about $1,200, more than her insurance would cover. $1,200. She sat at our kitchen table and she asked her father for help. Quentin said no. He said it with Cassian sitting right there at that same table, and he said it in the voice he used when he wanted to sound reasonable, measured, like a man explaining something to someone who simply did not have the full picture. Zara, we have talked about this. You made your choices. You have to build your own stability. We cannot keep stepping in. Zara's face went very still. She looked at me. I looked at my hands on the table. I told myself Quentin would talk to me about it later, that he had his reasons, that I would find another way to quietly help. That night, after Zara had gone home, I opened our joint bank account online. I'm not entirely sure what I was looking for. Maybe just a number that would make his answer make sense. What I saw instead was a transfer, dated that same day, $12,000. Not $1,200, $12,000. Moved to an account I did not recognize. I sat at the kitchen counter with my coffee getting cold, and I stared at that number for a long time. I told myself there was an explanation. A business transfer, an investment, something I did not understand because, as Quentin had reminded me gently many times over the years, finance was not my background. I did not sleep well. The next morning, I tried to move $200 from that joint account. A quiet transfer to Zara without telling Quentin. Just $200 for Marcus. The system stopped me. This transaction requires advisor authorization. I tried again. Large transfers require dual approval. Please contact your financial advisor. I read that message 4 times. My name was on that account, had been for 38 years. But somewhere in those 38 years, without a conversation I could clearly remember, without an explanation I had been given, the account had been moved to what the system called advisor-managed status. Quentin was the advisor of record. Any transfer over $500 required his approval or the approval of someone at his firm. I had a name on a piece of paper. I had no actual power over anything attached to it. I sat at that counter for a long time. My neighbor Betty called from next door, wanting to know if I was bringing apple pies to the church bazaar that Saturday, same as every year. I said yes, of course, 2 pies, same as always. I hung up. I sat back down, and I did not move for a while. It was Zara who gave me the next piece, without knowing that is what she was doing. She came by a few days later, not to ask for anything. She had found another way to cover Marcus's bills. She came because she had remembered something that had been sitting in the back of her mind, and after the Tuesday at the kitchen table, after she had watched her father look her son in the face and say no, she was looking at old memories differently. Months before, she had stopped by Quentin's office to drop off some documents. His assistant was away from her desk. The office door was open. On Quentin's computer screen, she had glimpsed a spreadsheet, just for a moment, and seen a name she did not recognize. Raven Powell. And below it, an address. A street in Decatur. She had thought nothing of it at the time. She assumed it was a client file. She told me about it quietly on the back porch while Quentin watched television inside. She wrote down the name and the address on a piece of paper and handed it to me. That night, I searched. Raven Powell. A senior colleague at Quentin's firm. A name I had heard at events over the years, always in passing, always in a professional context. I had never thought twice about her. But the Decatur address, that I found in the DeKalb County property records. A townhouse on Commerce Drive in Decatur, Georgia, purchased 18 months earlier. The owner of record was a limited liability company. The LLC had been registered 9 months before the purchase. Managing member, Quentin D. Washington. I checked the dates twice, 3 times. The same month that Quentin had told me we needed to tighten our spending because of market volatility. The month he had canceled our anniversary trip to Charleston. The month he had looked at my kitchen renovation plans and said, "Not the right time, Amara." That same month, he had put a deposit on a townhouse in Decatur through a company Zara had glimpsed by accident on a spreadsheet I had never been meant to see. Then came the night in the garage. I had gone downstairs for water around midnight. The garage door was pulled almost shut, but not all the way. Quentin was on the phone. I stood in the kitchen doorway and I listened. It has already been moved to Raven Powell's account. Get the LLC paperwork filed this week. Do not let it sit. And listen to me carefully. Do not let her find out about the Decatur property. She signs whatever I put in front of her. She always has. I walked back upstairs. I did not let my feet make a sound on the stairs. I got back into bed. I lay on my back in the dark and stared at the ceiling fan turning slow circles above me, and I thought about every stack of documents Quentin had brought home over the years. Just some account updates, Amara. This is a beneficiary change, standard procedure. This restructures how the assets are titled. It is a tax thing. And every time I had signed. Because he was the wealth advisor, because he told me, gently and many times, that finance was not my strength. Because I was making lunches or thinking about dinner or watching the news, and I had trusted him. She signs whatever I put in front of her. She always has. That sentence landed differently than anything else I had heard. Not because it was cruel, though it was, but because it was accurate. And because the accuracy of it told me something about myself that I had been avoiding for a long time. I had not been tricked into signing those documents because I was careless or foolish. I had signed them because somewhere in the geography of our marriage, I had decided, quietly, without ceremony, without even noticing the decision being made, that Quentin's judgment was more reliable than my own. That his confidence about financial matters was expertise I did not have and should not question. That trusting him completely was the same thing as being a good wife. Gaslighting does not always sound like a man yelling that you are crazy. Sometimes it sounds like 38 years of being told, gently and reasonably and in front of others, that someone else understands things better than you do, until you believe it, until you stop checking, until your own hesitation feels like the problem, not the thing causing it. I lay there in the dark that night and I thought, how many things have I not checked? In the days that followed, Quentin began saying things in front of Cassian. Little things, casual things. Your mother has been a little forgetful lately. She gets confused about the account sometimes. I have been keeping an eye on it. She worries unnecessarily, always has. Cassian did not challenge him. He just nodded, or looked concerned, or said nothing. I noticed. I filed it away. 3 days after I had first gone through the safe on my own, using the combination Quentin had never thought to change in the years I had known it, I came downstairs one morning and saw that the dial had been reset. New combination. He must have done it in the night. That morning at breakfast, he asked me, very pleasantly, very casually, whether I had been in his office recently. I said no. That same night, I heard him on the phone. I think she may have seen the backup file. Keep everything off the shared server from now on. He was accelerating. Moving things, closing doors. So was I, but he did not know that. I had already called Nadia Freeman, whose name I had seen in a community center newsletter months before, quoted saying something I had not been able to stop thinking about. The most common signature on a fraudulent marital document is the wife's, not because she agreed, because she trusted. I had her card. I had been to her office on Peachtree Street twice. I had handed her everything I had found, and she had looked at it carefully and told me what it meant. The last night of that week, after Quentin had settled into his bourbon and his television program and his certainty that he was still in control of every room in this house, I went to the safe using the old combination, the one he had not yet changed before I had already been in there, and I placed the divorce papers on top of everything. And underneath them, I placed a second copy of every document Nadia and I had already cataloged. Then I closed the safe quietly. I went to bed, and I waited. But what happened 3 nights later, when Quentin finally opened that safe and our children walked in one by one, was the moment this marriage stopped being a private matter. And what Quentin did when he felt cornered revealed something about him that no financial document ever could. 3 nights after I closed that safe, I was back in the sitting room, 2:17 in the morning. I had charged my phone twice that day just to be certain the camera feed would hold. I had not told Cassian what was coming. I had told no one except Nadia, who had told me to document everything calmly, to stay quiet, and to be ready to walk downstairs when the moment came. On the screen, Quentin entered his office in his charcoal robe, crossed to the credenza, and opened the safe. He reached in. He found the divorce papers. He read the first line, and he set them to the side, just as I had known he would. I set my phone face down on the side table. I put my feet into my slippers. I walked down the hall. When I pushed open his office door, he spun around. For 1/2 second, 1/2 second in 38 years, I saw something in Quentin Washington's face that I had never seen there before. Fear. Then it was gone, replaced by the expression I knew far better: controlled, measuring, calculating. Amara. His voice was perfectly even. It is late. I know, I said. I heard you moving around. A pause. Did you go into the safe recently? You already asked me that, I said, a few days ago. And I am asking again. I looked at him steadily. Quentin, what are you looking for? Something shifted behind his eyes. He straightened to his full height, and then he said, very quietly, very precisely, "Where is the USB, Amara?" Not a question, a statement. Now I want to stop here for just a moment. Because what happened in that room over the next hour was not just a confrontation between a husband and a wife. It was something that revealed, very precisely, under pressure, exactly who everyone in that family had been all along. And I think that matters. I think it matters deeply. When Quentin heard the front door open and Cassian came in, something shifted in him that I had never seen in quite that way before. He did not turn to our son with relief or with vulnerability. He turned to him with strategy. This is what control-oriented people do when they feel the ground moving under them. They do not reach for honesty. They reach for leverage. They look around the room and they identify the resource most likely to restore their position. And in that moment, for Quentin, that resource was Cassian. Not because he did not love his son. I believe in his own way, Quentin did love Cassian. But love and use are not always opposites. Sometimes they live in the same sentence. And a man who has spent his career managing assets has a tendency, under pressure, to look at the people in a room and see assets. Cassian was his eldest, his heir, the son who had grown up watching his father command rooms, manage money, present a certain kind of dignified authority to the world. The son who had been quietly, steadily told over the years that his mother got confused about these things, that she worried unnecessarily, that he, Cassian, was the one who understood how the world worked. That was not an accident. That was preparation. Before either of us spoke again, we heard the front door. Cassian. Our son had a key. He came in the way he always did on late weeknights, quietly, shoes off at the mat, trying not to wake anyone. He saw the light under the study door and pushed it open. He looked at his father. He looked at me. He looked at the contents of the safe spread across the credenza. What is going on? Quentin turned to him without a pause. I watched it happen. That smooth, practiced pivot, the one I had seen him use at 100 difficult dinners when the conversation needed redirecting. Your mother, Quentin said, has been going through my private files. She has taken something that does not belong to her, something confidential. Cassian looked at me. I said nothing.
What is it?
Not
Just
yet.
something I wrote.
Dad,
honey,
what?
Read it.
She has not been herself lately. You have noticed it yourself, Cassian. I have mentioned it to you. She forgets things. She misunderstands. She has been going into rooms she does not normally go into, making accusations she cannot support. You told me she was getting forgetful, Cassian said slowly. You said she had been confused about the accounts. Because she has been. And now she has removed something from this office that belongs to me. Client materials, confidential documents. He looked at our son and his voice dropped to something quieter, more direct. Cassian, I need you to do something for me right now. I need you to tell your mother to return the USB tonight, right now." Cassian went very still. He looked at me, then at his father, then back at me. He was being asked to choose a side in a room where he did not yet fully understand what the sides were. Watch what Cassian does here. Because his hesitation, the fact that he did not immediately move toward his father, did not immediately comply, was not just reluctance. It was the first honest thing he had done in this situation in a very long time. His whole body was registering something that his mind was not yet ready to name, that the story he had been given about his mother did not match the woman standing in front of him right now. She was not confused. She was not frightened. She was calm in a way that only comes from preparation. And somewhere in Cassian's chest, something was beginning to shift. He was 37 years old, and his father was asking him to be a wall. And for the first time in his life, he was not sure he wanted to be. The front door opened again. Zara. She had texted me earlier that evening. She and Marcus had been at a friend's house nearby. Marcus was asleep in the car. She just wanted to drop off a casserole. She had seen the lights on. She pushed the study door open and stood in the doorway, taking in the scene, the open safe, the papers on the credenza, her father's composed face, her brother's conflicted one, and me, standing near the door with my hands folded in front of me. She looked at Quentin. "What did you do?" Quentin turned to her with the particular patience he had always used with Zara, the patience of a man who had decided long ago that she was the difficult one, the emotional one, the one who did not understand how things worked. "Your mother is upset. She has made some decisions this evening that we are going to work through as a family. There is nothing that requires your—" "You still say it that way, don't you?" Zara's voice was not loud. It was cold and very clear. "You still say, Mom does not understand money, let me handle it. You told Cassian that Mom would sign anything you put in front of her because she does not have a head for business. You actually used those words. I heard you." "Zara, I heard you say it on the phone once, a few years ago. I did not say anything because I thought maybe I had misunderstood." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She set it on the credenza, screen up, bright in the low light of that study. I did not misunderstand. On the screen, a bank transfer confirmation, $12,000. Dated the same Tuesday evening that Quentin had sat at our kitchen table and told Zara he could not help with Marcus's ear specialist. "That is the night," Zara said, "that you looked at your grandson and said, 'Our family does not have the capacity to help right now.'" The room was completely quiet. Cassian picked up Zara's phone. He looked at the number. He looked at the date. He set it back down and looked at his father. "Dad," his voice was almost a whisper, "is this real?" "That is a business transfer," Quentin said, and his voice was still controlled, still measured. "Zara does not understand the financial structure of—" "Then explain it," Cassian said. "Explain to me how we had $12,000 to move the same night you told my sister you could not spare $1,200 for Marcus." Silence. Quentin looked at our son, and I watched him calculate, watched him decide whether the right words could still bring Cassian back. "Cassian." His tone shifted slightly, lower, more intimate, man to man. "You have always been the one in this family who understands the long view, who understands that protecting what we have built requires decisions that not everyone will understand immediately. Your mother—" "Stop," Cassian said at once, quietly. Quentin stopped. Cassian did not look at him. He was looking at the divorce papers on the credenza, then at the transfer record on Zara's phone, then at me. "Mom," he said, "how long have you known about all of this?" "I have known pieces for about 3 months," I said. "Attorney Nadia Freeman has known nearly as long." "You hired?" Quentin's composure slipped just for a moment. "You hired an attorney?" "You hired one to design my financial future without telling me," I said. 9 years ago. The silence after that was a different kind of silence. Quentin straightened. He was still taller than me. He still had the voice and the bearing and the decades of authority. He used all of it. You think you have won something, Amara. You have not. You have made a move. His voice was very quiet and very cold. I have been making moves for a long time. There are documents with your signature on them. There are legal agreements in your name. Any attorney who tells you otherwise is simply taking your money. He picked up his phone from the desk. I am calling my attorney tonight, and when this is over, you are going to understand exactly what you consented to over the course of this marriage. He paused in the doorway. He looked at Cassian. I am sorry it came to this, he said. Not to me, to our son. And he walked out. Cassian sat down in the office chair. He put both hands over his face. Zara moved to stand beside me. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then Cassian said, from behind his hands, he asked me to back him up. When he said you were getting forgetful, he called me and asked me if I had noticed it too, and I said yes, because I thought he was just worried about you. He stopped. Mom, I said yes. I looked at my son. I know, I said. I helped him. I know, baby. I know you did. And I also know why. He looked up at me. His eyes were red at the edges. Here's the thing about Cassian that I want you to understand. He was not a bad son. He was not a callous person. He was a man who had been handed a version of his mother. Forgetful, worried, confused, not quite reliable on these things. And he had accepted it without checking because it came from his father, and his father had always been the authority in this family on questions of what was real and what was not. That is the quietest kind of harm in a family shaped by one person's control. It does not just affect the primary target, it radiates outward. It shapes the children. It teaches them, without ever saying it directly, whose perception to trust and whose to discount. And then, when the structure finally cracks, they have to stand in the rubble of a story they were handed and reckon with the fact that they carried it without questioning it. Cassian's shame in that office was real, but so was his awakening, and sometimes those two things arrive in the same moment. What happens now? He said. Now, I said, we go to mediation, and we let everything on that USB drive speak for itself. What that drive contained and what it revealed about how carefully and how long ago Quentin Washington had begun building a plan to leave me with nothing is the part of this story that stopped an entire room cold. The conference room on the 14th floor of a building on West Peachtree Street in Midtown Atlanta was clean and neutral in the way that rooms designed for impossible conversations always are. Gray carpet, long oval table, a window with a view of the city skyline that no one looked at. There were 6 of us at that table. Nadia Freeman and I on one side. Quentin and his attorney, a man named Gerald Marsh, polished, still, the kind of still that told you he had sat in rooms like this many times, on the other. A mediator named Patricia, who spoke in even, unhurried sentences. And, at a small table set slightly apart from the main group, because her attorney had negotiated a separate position in the room, a woman named Raven Powell. I had met Raven Powell at firm events over the years. She was 58, elegantly dressed, composed in the way that people become composed when they have learned that the safest way to survive a room is to take up only exactly the space required. She wore dark colors and kept her natural hair in a low twist. She did not look at Quentin when she entered the room. He did not look at her. Cassian was seated behind me, just outside the formal arrangement of the mediation. He had insisted on coming. I had asked him not to. Zara had told him anyway, and he had driven over at 7 in the morning and was sitting behind me with his hands folded on his knees. Nadia began. She was methodical. That is the word I think of when I remember watching her work. Methodical and completely unhurried, in the way that people are unhurried when they know exactly what they are carrying and precisely how much it weighs. She presented the joint account restructuring. The shift to advisor-managed status completed 6 years into the arrangement, without my knowledge that the change removed my independent transaction rights. She produced the paperwork, with my signature, my date, my initials in the required places, and she also produced an email Quentin had sent his assistant at the time, explaining that the change should be described to me as an administrative upgrade for ease of household management. Gerald Marsh stirred. Those internal communications were obtained through proper discovery, Nadia said pleasantly. She did not pause. She presented the Decatur LLC, the townhouse on Commerce Drive. The transfers from the marital joint account into the LLC operating account across 18 months, transfers that coincided month by month with the period during which Quentin had told me we needed to be careful with spending, had canceled our anniversary trip, had told me the kitchen renovations were not the right time. She laid the account statements on the table one by one. Quentin's expression had not changed, but he had stopped writing on his notepad several minutes ago. Then Raven Powell's attorney slid a single page across the table. My client is providing a voluntary statement of cooperation, he said. Gerald Marsh read it. Something moved across his face that he controlled quickly. He slid it toward Quentin. Quentin read it. He set it face down on the table. Nadia clicked a small projector. Text appeared on the wall screen. I had read it the week before, in Nadia's office, and I had placed it face down on her desk and looked out at the Peachtree Street traffic below and just breathed for a moment. But I read it again now, a text message. Sent from Quentin to Raven Powell 4 years earlier. Amara will think she has won when she gets the Cascade Heights house. She will not know about the note attached to it. By the time she figures it out, there will be nothing left to fight over. The note attached to it. The house on Cascade Heights Drive, the house with the creaking porch swing and the 2 oak trees Quentin had planted the year Cassian was born, and the kitchen I had wanted to renovate and never had. That house had a second mortgage against it, taken out 4 years prior using a refinancing document that I had signed on a Tuesday evening in a stack of papers Quentin had brought to the kitchen table while dinner was in the oven because he had said it was a routine adjustment and I had trusted him. The loan was structured to become fully due within 18 months of any property transfer. If I had accepted the Cascade Heights house in the divorce settlement, which was exactly what Quentin's initial offer proposed, the house and a modest cash amount, that hidden loan would have surfaced after the papers were signed. Its amount would have consumed nearly everything I received. I would have walked away from a 38-year marriage believing I had won, watching that win evaporate while Quentin and his attorney had already moved on. He had not just planned to give me less. He had designed exactly how losing would feel. I want to stay here for a moment because this detail, the Cascade Heights trap, is the one that reveals the most about the psychology of what had been done to me, and I think it deserves to be looked at clearly. There is a particular kind of cruelty that is much harder to name than anger or violence, because it does not look like cruelty from the outside. It looks like generosity. It looks like compromise. It looks like a man offering his wife the family home and a settlement, which is more than many women receive. But built into that apparent generosity was a mechanism that would have destroyed the gift 6 months after I accepted it. The purpose was not to give me something. The purpose was to make me feel, briefly, that I had won, and then to watch the floor fall away. The reason this matters psychologically is what it tells us about motive. A man who simply wants to keep money does not construct an elaborate false gift. He just refuses to share it and fights the divorce. But a man who needs to feel that the person he wronged still ended up with nothing, that person needs control even over the narrative of defeat. He needed me not just to lose, but to feel the specific experience of thinking I had won and then losing. That was part of the plan. The emotional architecture of my humiliation had been designed as carefully as the financial one. Zara said it in the room, quietly but with absolute precision. He did not just hide the money. He designed the feeling of defeat. I could not have said it better myself. Behind me, I heard Cassian say it quietly, almost to himself. He was going to let her take the house, so she would lose everything. He did not just hide the money. He designed the feeling of defeat, Zara said softly. I looked at Quentin and said, "You did not hide money from me. You hid me from my own life. You did not just move funds into accounts I could not access. You arranged everything, the house, the accounts, the documents, the timing, so that if I ever tried to leave, I would believe I had options when I had none. You built a maze and handed me a map that only led deeper into it. Cassian said from behind me, quietly but steadily, I do not need generational wealth that was built on my mother living in the dark her entire life. I do not need it at all. Gerald Marsh placed a thick folder on the table. Pages and pages of documents, each one bearing my name, my signature, my initials. Mrs. Washington, he said, has executed an extensive series of authorizations throughout this marriage. Powers of attorney for financial management, account waivers, beneficiary reassignments, property agreements. These documents bear her full legal consent. Our position is that Mrs. Washington was an active, informed participant in the financial architecture of this marriage, and that characterizing Mr. Washington's decisions as concealment misrepresents her role entirely. He spread several pages in a fan across the table. She signed. She agreed. She cannot now claim she did not know what she was consenting to. Quentin looked at me across the table, and for just a moment, something like satisfaction flickered behind his eyes. You see, Amara, he said, and his voice had found its footing again. The voice of a man who has just played what he believes is his strongest card. I did not hide anything from you. You simply do not remember what you agreed to. The room was waiting. Nadia put her hand briefly near mine on the table, just near it. Amara, she said very quietly, now. And what I placed on that table next is what turned a room full of careful, professional silence into something none of us will ever forget. I reached into my bag. I placed the USB drive, backup 2019, in Quentin's own handwriting, on the table in front of Nadia. Quentin's eyes went to it immediately. His body went very still. Nadia opened her laptop. She inserted the drive. She clicked the first file. On the projection screen behind her, an email draft appeared. Sent from Quentin's personal account to a private attorney's address, dated 9 years ago. The subject line read, Asset Minimization Strategy, Post-Children's Adulthood. I heard Cassian make a sound behind me. Not a word, just a sound. The sound of something landing. The email was a memo. Detailed, structured, organized with the precision of a man who had spent his entire career building systems that worked exactly as intended. It outlined a multi-year plan to reduce what a spouse could legally claim in a divorce, structured to activate gradually, so gradually that no single step would look like anything other than ordinary financial management. It referenced optimal timelines. It referenced what it called signature opportunities, moments when consent could be obtained without triggering scrutiny. And it referenced, in its third section, the potential use of an adult child as a financial cosigner to provide what the document called additional structural insulation, if the strategy were ever challenged. Nadia clicked to the second file, a follow-up document dated 2 years later, showing how the signature-based authorization strategy had been implemented. How the advisor-managed designation on the joint account had been established. How the beneficiary on Quentin's life insurance policy had been quietly changed from my name to Raven Powell's, using a form I had initialed in a stack of papers I had not read carefully enough. She clicked to the third file. This one was a contingency plan, written in the same careful, precise language as the others. It outlined what should happen if the primary strategy were discovered, and it named, as the recommended next step in that scenario, the engagement of the eldest adult child as a guarantor and legal buffer. Someone who could, if needed, provide testimony about the wife's confusion and forgetfulness. Someone who could, if the paperwork were challenged, serve as a co-signatory on restructured documents. The eldest adult child. Cassian's name was not in the document. The role was. Let me tell you what it felt like to watch my husband read those words on that screen. For 9 years, Quentin Washington had been the man who framed every situation, who set the terms of every conversation, who walked into every room already holding the map. He had built a career, a family, a public reputation, an entire architecture of control, and it had worked for a very long time because the people inside that architecture had trusted the architect. But there is a specific kind of collapse that happens to a controlling person in the moment they lose the narrative. It is not like the collapse of an angry person, which is loud and dramatic and releases something. It is quieter than that, and in some ways, much harder to watch. Because what you are seeing is not just a person losing an argument. You are seeing someone lose the story they have been telling themselves about who they are. Quentin had believed, and I think this is true, as painful as it is, that he was the one who held this family together. That his management, his planning, his decisions, even the ones made in darkness, were acts of stewardship. He was the patriarch, the provider, the one who understood what others could not. And in the moment those files appeared on that screen, every version of that story became impossible to maintain. What had been stewardship was now a 9-year document. What had been family leadership was now a contingency plan that included using his own son as a buffer. He could not reframe this. He had written it himself. Cassian sat behind me without speaking for a long moment. Then he said, and his voice was barely audible, "Dad, what were you going to use me for?" Quentin looked at the screen. The silence in that room was the most complete silence I have ever sat inside. The kind that has weight, the kind that presses. Gerald Marsh was not writing. He was looking at the table in front of him. Patricia, the mediator, had both hands flat on her notepad. Raven Powell, in her chair to the side, was looking at her own hands in her lap. She had known parts of this, not all of it, I think, not how deeply the architecture ran. The expression on her face was not guilt exactly. It was the expression of someone who has just understood the full size of something she had only ever seen parts of before. Quentin said nothing. I looked at him. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. But when it arrived, the rehearsed words fell away, and what came out was simpler than anything I had planned. "I did not forget that I signed those papers," I said. "I remember signing them. I remember exactly where I was standing, and what was on the stove, and what you said to me when you handed me the pen. I was not confused. I was not forgetful." I paused. "I was trusting, and you knew that. You counted on that. You handed me a pen the way someone hands a tool to a job they have already planned." I looked at him steadily. "And when you worried the pen might not be enough," I said, "you were willing to put our son's hands on the same documents, to make him part of a plan he did not know he was part of. You told me you were building something for your children, but you were willing to use your child as a shield." Quentin did not look away, but he did not speak. "From this moment forward," I said, "you are no longer the man who explains money to everyone in the room. You are the man who has to explain himself." Gerald Marsh leaned toward Quentin and spoke in a low voice. Quentin did not respond. He was looking at the screen, at his own words from 9 years ago, displayed on a wall in a room full of witnesses. Gerald Marsh accepted the revised settlement terms at 4:47 that afternoon. Not the house. The hidden second mortgage on Cascade Heights had disqualified it as a good faith offer. What was agreed to instead? A fair division of marital assets that accounted for the full 38-year length of the marriage. The Decatur LLC and its property. A portion of the accounts Raven's cooperation had helped us locate. The retirement and pension funds calculated properly across the full length of the marriage. Nadia signed her name. I signed mine. And for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, when I signed something, I knew exactly what it said. Outside on West Peachtree Street, Atlanta moved around us the way cities move, ordinary and indifferent, full of people going somewhere else. Cassian hugged me on that sidewalk for a long time without saying much. The hug said what he could not yet put into words. Zara stood beside us with her arms crossed over her chest, looking out at the street. When Cassian stepped back, she said simply, "You okay, Mom?" "I am going to be," I said. She nodded. She knew the difference between those two things. She had lived in that difference herself. Nadia stopped beside me before she walked to her car. "You did everything right," she said quietly. "Every single step." "I had good help," I said. She shook her head, just slightly. "I gave you the tools. You are the one who knew what to do with them." I turned my face up toward the October sky above Atlanta, and I took one long, slow breath. I was 62 years old. I had a legal settlement, my dignity, and documents that I had actually read before I signed them. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. But the real healing, the part of the story that I still think about when I sit on the porch in the evenings, had not happened yet. It happened 6 months later, in a smaller house, when a 9-year-old boy said something so simple that I had to sit down and just let it land. 6 months later, I lived on a quieter street. Not Cascade Heights Drive. Not the 5-bedroom house with the oak trees Quentin had planted in the front yard. I had let that go. The house, most of what had filled it, and along with those things, slowly and deliberately, the version of myself who had believed that making herself small was the same as keeping the peace. My new home was a Craftsman on a tree-lined block in the Kirkwood neighborhood, on the east side of Atlanta. Smaller by a good measure, 3 bedrooms instead of 5. 1 bathroom with original tile that was charming in the particular way that old tile is charming. Imperfectly, with character, without apology. The front porch had a wooden railing I had already painted twice and fully intended to paint again. There was no porch swing yet. I was going to get one. I wanted it to creak on the left side. I had grown fond of that sound. The first morning I woke up in that house as mine, not as a temporary arrangement, not as a place I was staying while things sorted themselves out, but as my house, my name and only my name on the deed. I made a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table and let it stay warm. I looked out the window at the backyard. It needed work. Overgrown beds along the fence, a tree that needed trimming, a strip of grass that had quietly given up. I thought, I know my bank account number. I know my password. I know my balance this morning to the dollar. I transferred money to Zara on Tuesday for Marcus's school supplies, and I did it from my account with my password, and I did not ask anyone's permission or explain it to anyone afterward. I drank my coffee. The backyard really did need work. I was looking forward to it. There is something I have come to understand about freedom that I wish someone had told me when I was younger. Freedom is not always loud. It does not always arrive with fanfare or a dramatic moment of declaration. Sometimes it looks like a cup of coffee that stays warm because you made it for yourself. Sometimes it looks like knowing your own password. Sometimes it looks like buying a bunch of flowers from the grocery store on a Thursday afternoon for no reason except that they were yellow and you wanted them, and you did not have to explain that to anyone. Those are not small things. Those are the things I had been missing for longer than I had realized. And getting them back, quietly, one ordinary morning at a time, was the healing I had not known I needed until I was already inside it. But I want to be honest with you, because I think you deserve that. The healing was not a straight line. There were mornings, more of them than I expected, when I would wake up in the early dark of that Kirkwood house and the quiet would feel less like peace and more like absence. When I would reach for the rhythm of a life I had lived for 38 years and find only the unfamiliar stillness of a house that was too new to feel like memory yet. There were evenings when I would sit at the kitchen table after dinner with my reading glasses still on and a half-finished cup of tea going cold, and I would find myself doing the math. Not financial math, the other kind. The kind where you count the years and try to locate the exact moment when things turned, when trust became leverage, when love became management. And the answer was always the same uncomfortable one. There was no single moment. That was the whole point. It had been so gradual that the woman it was happening to had not felt it happening at all. Those evenings were hard. What helped, I found, was not trying to resolve them into something tidier than they were. Not forcing the grief into gratitude before it was ready. I would just sit there, with the cold tea and the Atlanta night coming in through the cracked kitchen window, The smell of someone's wood smoke 2 streets over, a car passing, the oak tree in my front yard moving slightly in a breeze I could not feel from inside, and I would let it be exactly as heavy as it was. And then, eventually, I would get up and wash the cup, and go to bed, and wake up the next morning and make the coffee, and know the password, and be still here. That was the healing. Not one large thing, 10,000 small ones accumulating in the same quiet, patient way that the harm had once accumulated, except now they were mine, and they were building something instead of taking it apart. That fall, I started something at the Kirkwood Community Center. It began as a conversation with a woman named Gloria, who ran a financial literacy program there. She had heard about my situation through Nadia's professional network and asked if I would come speak to a small group of women. I was not a lawyer. I was not a financial advisor. I was a 62-year-old woman who had spent 38 years signing documents she had not read, and I knew, specifically and in detail, exactly how that had happened, what it had cost me, and what could have been done differently at every step along the way. The first evening, there were 7 women around a folding table in a church fellowship hall on Howard Street in Kirkwood. By the third session, there were 19. By the time winter came, Gloria had given the program a name and started a waiting list. I taught them the things I wished someone had taught me: how to read a financial document before you sign it, how to identify whose name is listed and what authority that name actually carries, how to understand the difference between an account with your name on it and an account where your name is the only name, what advisor manage means in practice, how beneficiary designations can be changed without your knowledge, how to ask clearly and without apology, whose name is on this, and what does that actually mean for me? Small things, practical things, the kind of things that nobody tells you because everyone assumes you already know, or assumes your husband knows and that is enough. It has never been enough. And I was standing in front of those women every session as living proof of what it costs when we accept that. One evening, near the end of a session, a woman named Dorothy, 71 years old, recently widowed, trying to make sense of her late husband's financial accounts for the first time, raised her hand. "How do you stop feeling ashamed?" she asked. "That you did not know? That you let it go on for so long?" The room went quiet. Every woman at that table was looking at me. I thought about how to answer that honestly. Not the answer that sounded wise, the true one. "The shame does not disappear all at once," I said. "I want to be truthful about that. There are still days when I think about a document I signed in 2003 while I was making school lunches and my heart tightens. Still moments when I hear the word advisor and something in me goes cold." I paused. "But what I have learned is this: shame is exactly what they count on. The people who exploit trust in a marriage are relying on you being too embarrassed to ask questions, too embarrassed to say you did not understand what you signed, too embarrassed to disturb the peace of a household that is running on your silence." I looked at Dorothy. "The shame is not incidental. It is part of the structure. It keeps you from looking too closely. It keeps you from asking the question that might change everything." I stopped. "You were not foolish. You were trusting. And someone used a system you were never taught to navigate. That is not your failure. That is their wrong." Several women were writing things down. Dorothy nodded slowly, her pen still in her hand, and something in her face shifted. Not relief exactly, but the beginning of permission. Permission to put the shame down, to pick up something more useful instead. "What you do with that knowledge now," I said, "is the only part that still belongs to you entirely. And that part is enormous." Cassian came by on Saturdays. Always with something useful. A plant for the porch, groceries, his toolbox, building his way back to me in the only language he had ever known for love: practical, steady, showing up and fixing things. One Saturday in November, he was on his knees in my kitchen, rehanging a cabinet door that would not close flush, the radio going low behind him. I was at the table working on notes for the next session. He tightened the last screw, tested the door, Then he stayed kneeling for a moment, not getting up. "Mom," he said, "I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish it." "All right," I said. He got to his feet and turned around, still holding the screwdriver. He looked, as he so often did, like his father in the physical ways, the height, the jaw, the hands, and nothing at all like him in the ways that mattered. "When Dad called me and said you were getting forgetful, I should have called you first. I should have come and sat down with you and asked you what was happening from your own side. I did not do that. I accepted the picture he gave me, and then I confirmed it when he asked me to." He stopped. "I helped him build a story about you that was not true, and I carried that story without questioning it." I looked at my son. "I know," I said quietly. "I am going to be sorry about that for a long time." "That is all right," I said. "Sorry is how you know you understand what happened. The question is what you do with it after." I got up from the table and put my arms around him. My 37-year-old firstborn, in my kitchen in Kirkwood, with the cabinet door finally closing properly behind him. "You saw what was true when it mattered," I said. "You did not do what he asked you to do in that room. You stood still, and that was enough." He held on for a long moment. "Can we figure out how to be honest with each other from here?" "Yes," I said. "That is exactly what we are going to do." He stepped back and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed the way men sometimes are about being caught feeling something real. He looked around my kitchen, at the mismatched chairs I had chosen because I liked them, the small potted herb garden on the windowsill that was thriving against all odds, the hand-painted wooden sign above the door that I had bought from a woman at a Saturday market on Moreland Avenue, simply because it made me smile. "You know what?" he said, looking around slowly. "This place actually feels like you." I looked at him. "The other house," he said carefully. "It was beautiful, but it never felt like just you." I stood very still for a moment, and then I said, "No, it did not." We stood there in the quiet of that kitchen, and neither of us needed to say anything else about it. Zara came on Sunday evenings, always with Marcus, who was 9 years old and had his grandmother's eyes and his mother's sharp mind and an energy that filled every room he entered within approximately 4 seconds of arrival. He had opinions about everything. My kitchen radio was ancient, the backyard urgently needed a basketball hoop, and he had recently and very seriously informed me that my vacuum cleaner sounded like it was trying to survive. "It is," I told him, "and so am I. And both of us are doing just fine." He considered this, then went back to what he was doing, apparently satisfied. One Sunday evening, he was running his customary loop through the living room and hallway, and then he stopped in the middle of the kitchen where I was stirring something on the stove. "Grandma," he said, with the gravity that only a 9-year-old can bring to an observation about atmosphere, "your house feels different from Granddad's." I looked at him over my shoulder. "Different how?" He shrugged in the full-body way. "Happier, like you can actually breathe in here." I turned back to the stove. "Yes," I said, "you are exactly right. You can." I kept stirring, but I had to take a slow breath, because the back of my throat had gone tight, and my eyes were stinging, and I did not want Marcus to see his grandmother cry over a 9-year-old's observation about the quality of air in a kitchen. But the truth was that what he had just said, so easily, so matter-of-factly, the way children say the truest things without trying, was the most complete summary of my last 6 months that I had heard from anyone. Like you can actually breathe in here. Yes, that was exactly it. I had not had a word for what had changed until a 9-year-old gave me one. Breathing. The simple, constant, unremarkable act that you do not notice until something has been pressing against your chest for so long that you forgot what it felt like not to carry the weight. I had been carrying that weight for longer than I had known, and I had set it down, and the air in this smaller, quieter, mine house tasted different because of it. After dinner, while Zara did the dishes and Marcus sprawled across my living room rug with a book and a handful of crackers, I sat in my reading chair by the window and looked at the two of them in the yellow kitchen light, and I thought, This This is the inheritance I can actually give them. Not a townhouse in Decatur, not an account structured to benefit someone else. This. A grandmother who is fully, actually, unambiguously here. Quentin texted sometimes, not often, 2 or 3 times across those 6 months. Each message carefully worded, still framed, still the language of a man who could not fully stop being a man who managed narratives even when there was no narrative left to control. One evening in December, a message came. "I hope you are well, Amara. I wonder sometimes whether we could have found another way through this." I read it. I set my phone on the kitchen counter. I put on my coat and walked out to the front porch. The December evening was cool and dry, the kind of Atlanta winter night that feels like the city is just trying the season on. Down the street, someone had white Christmas lights along their front fence, steady and clean. A dog was barking 2 houses over and then was not. I stood there on my porch, my railing, my paint, and I thought about his question. There had been another way. It would have required him, from the very beginning, to see me as a full partner, to believe that I deserved to understand the financial life we had built together, to bring me documents and explain them, rather than placing them in front of me while dinner was on the stove and trusting that I would not look too closely. He had not chosen that way. He had chosen, document by careful document, over 9 deliberate years, to build a structure around me in which I held the appearance of a life, but none of the real authority over it. And in the end, what that choice had cost him was the one thing he had always called his legacy. Not the money, not the properties, the respect of his son, the trust of his daughter. The story he had wanted to tell about himself as a father, generational wealth built on control and concealment, does not pass down intact. It passes down as a lesson. And Cassian and Zara had received theirs. I went back inside. I made chamomile tea, this time in a mug I had chosen myself, on a shelf where I had placed it because I wanted it there. I sat at my kitchen table in my house in Kirkwood. I opened my laptop. I looked at my bank account, my individual account, my name only, my routing number memorized, my password known to no one else in the world, and I looked at the balance, which was not what it once might have been, but which was mine in every real and legal and permanent sense of the word. I closed the laptop. I drank my tea while it was still warm, and I sat there in the quiet of a house that breathed easy, and I whispered to myself the thing I had been needing to say for a long time. He had 9 years to prepare to erase me. I had 3 months to prepare to remain. And I am still here. Everything in this house belongs to me. Really, actually, fully mine. After 38 years of being a signature on someone else's plan, I am finally the person standing at the top of my own life. In the spring, Nadia sent me a note. The financial fraud documentation from the mediation had been referred to state regulators for review of Quentin's professional conduct. His firm's compliance department was conducting an internal audit. His professional standing was, as Nadia put it quietly, under significant pressure. The generational wealth he had spent 9 years engineering, built on control and concealment and the gradual, systematic erosion of a wife's trust and access, was now being examined by people whose entire job was to look at exactly these kinds of structures. The legacy he had wanted to leave his children had become a case study in what not to do. And I was in a house in Kirkwood, teaching women how to read their own documents with a cup of coffee warm in my hand. This story teaches us that financial betrayal inside a marriage is almost never a single dramatic moment. It is a pattern of small silences and unread pages and unchallenged assumptions that accumulate, year by patient year, until the weight of them is almost impossible to lift. But lift it you can. What Amara Washington's story reminds us, most of all, is that it is never too late to learn the language of your own life. Not at 50, not at 60, not at 62. The moment a woman decides to look clearly at what is truly hers and what has quietly been taken from her, The moment she stops apologizing for asking questions she should have asked years ago, that is the moment she begins to reclaim herself. Trust is still a beautiful thing. It still matters deeply. But trust given without information is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability. And there are people who will exploit it without hesitation and without remorse, for as long as they are allowed to. The real generational wealth we leave our children is not a balance in a hidden account. It is the example of a woman who woke up, stood up, collected her evidence, walked into a room fully prepared, and refused, quietly, with full dignity, to let her story be written by someone else. Amara lost years. She did not lose herself, and in the end, that was the only account that ever truly mattered. If this story moved something in you today, if it reminded you of someone you love or something you have quietly carried for a long time, please share it with her. And remember, your name belongs at the top of your own life. It always did.